So I'm here with Shyam P. Madiraju, filmmaker behind 55. Beautiful film, first off.
Thank
So I'm going to ask a lot of film geeky questions during this interview. I'm going to warn you
That'll
um,
be delightful. Thank you.
quite a bit. So first off, my curious question, and you've answered this ad nauseum, but the 5-year window came out on IMDb when I look at 2020. Talk about the release journey for your film.
So I think everybody know the whole world came to a complete stop in 2020, and just everything changed since then. This film, I guess, in the spirit of true indie filmmaking, literally was an audition journey. So an Iliad kind of a journey in its making, in its own making of how it's. So it went through a lots of topics, ups and downs. But we made the film, but we couldn't finish it in 2020. So we actually entered an unfinished cut to Busan. And because every other festival was practically shut down, there was nothing happening. We kind of pretty much risked it and sent it unfinished. But sadly, that gamble didn't pay off. And if anything, it actually hurt us because we couldn't enter it later to any other festival after that. And it just languished for a very long time. So we had to raise funds for it. And eventually, the film made its way to Ridley Scott, who saw it. And it was perhaps, in my opinion, maybe made the whole journey all worth it because literally, when the Godzilla of filmmaking calls and tells you that you're not half as bad at breathing fire or making films, it's the ultimate compliment you can get. And that at that point, I was like, yes, this journey is worth it. And he came on board, Scott Free came on board. They helped us secure the remaining funds. And so we finished the film, and finally, it's now hopefully finding its audience.
Just to expand on that, just my first film geeky question is, I mean, in my opinion, Ridley Scott is the Godzilla of filmmakers. He is a beautiful visualist and a great storyteller. Just what does it mean to you personally as a film geek yourself to have someone I'm sure you really loved growing up to actually have him and his Scott Free Productions actually be help you along the way?
It's hard to put into actual terms because you grow up watching his films. You grow up, in fact, I followed his work from advertising days, back from the very first little short film he made called The Cyclist, which he shot with his brother. His brother was his crew member, and his other brother was a cyclist. And just you could tell that from a very early perspective, this is a true filmmaker. He's an auteur. He understands that the language of camera is almost words in itself. It's a form of expression. You're not just shooting what's on the page. It's like, I think, like Billy Wilder once joked, it's like, it's good for directors to be able to write and read, but it's not necessary. But what's really important is for directors to be able to read. So like, and I think what he meant by is just directors who see beyond what's the script. And I think, and it's not just translating it into a camera shot, but really being able to integrate it in a, for a lack of a better term, cinematic language. And I think that really becomes the authorship. And coming back to Ridley Scott, that's the one signature you understand right away. He understands cinema from a very granular level. He's almost like an omnipresent force on a set. You can see that he's not just observing a scene. He does the anthropology of a scene from a multiple perspective, and you can see how that scene can be covered. And you can watch it in his films. He had the presence of mind to shoot in certain ways and get certain elements. And that's something that, as a film buff, you really watch that kind of a perspective. And he does it at an epic, grand level, which is just, in its own sense, is remarkable achievement. So I literally loved, I think I'm one of the few guys who even loved A Good Year, which he shot. I love that film. And everyone's like, what? How do you love that film? I'm like, no, there's like really, there's great storytelling in there. There is a great character development. It's like, all right. But so I've loved his, and his brother too. His brother's actually perhaps, Tony has a remarkable, is probably a bit underrated, but he's done brilliantly good films. In fact, I actually think he's probably the father of most of the modern filmmakers, like Antoine Fuqua, Zack Snyder. All these guys we all learned. I used to be an advertising director myself. Well, I still do it, but not as often. All of us in some way are bound by the Tony Scott law. We learned our idea of taking storytelling to a little bit more commercial level and using execution not just as a form, but as content or as, function, is something Tony did extremely well. The way he graded his films, the way he used flash cuts, the way he used time jumps. He was a pioneer in that sense.
Yeah, just a sort of a left turn here. I remember Tony Scott when I interviewed him for Domino, and at the time he was so at the top of his game. He was
I was
talking about being excited and learning more and experimenting with editing with Domino and how it excited him. And I'm wondering for you, even though you're a veteran filmmaker, is that the attitude you approached this film where you didn't know it all, you were learning on the process and it excited you because this film feels like it's a person going on a personal journey himself.
Greg, my quintessential fear of life is that someday somebody's going to figure out I'm not as talented as any they think I am, and that fear, and it's not something I'm saying in trite or some sort of a funny way. I actually mean it. So for me, constant learning is like breathing, and I think it's just, and that is literally what people like Tony would say and Tony would do. It's just the constant process of knowing how else can you push the boundaries? And that comes only from having this constant need to learn more, do things differently, just keep evolving, keep moving the boundaries. And I think to your question, that is precisely how I'm. And we're living in a time where literally news cycles are 24 hours old. What happened yesterday is literally practically nobody has any recollection. That's how little our attention span is becoming. We're becoming so saturated, so jaded, and so apathetic towards anything that even the most, should I say, deeply affecting suffering of humankind is just a fleeting little shot and it just goes away. Something else comes in. So, in a saturated environment like that, how do you find empathy? How do you learn from new things? How do you kind of incorporate that within your knowledge? And within from that knowledge, how do you incorporate it into your writing of characters? How do you incorporate it in the storytelling? And then how do you incorporate that into filmic point of view that becomes very universal? So all that is a part of learning process. And I don't think there is a period to the end of that sentence because you just can't seem to come to some sort of a destination in that where, okay, I have arrived. I don't think that exists, at least in my experience. I'm sure some other people might think they have, and all respect to them. But in my thing, it's like I really constantly treat the journey as itself. The process for me is it's the most enjoyable part. So I'm willing to try and willing to learn. It's a long-winded answer, so
No, I think a couple of things that are very resonant with 55, in my opinion, is we have a protagonist who, like you said, it's a 24-hour news cycle. He could, what is it, harami? As part of the,
it's a very typical vernacular in Indian language. Actually, it's in Arabic too. It's basically the most demeaning word in that language where it's an epithet and it's almost like the lowest of the low. A literal word means bastard or a thief or and a lot of people call him that in that film because, and that's part of the reason why I chose for him to not have any names. And for me, that's really like, I kind of always believe this that within the first few seconds you're born, you're given a name, an identity, a race, and a religion. And you find the rest of your life either being defined by it or fighting it. That's literally becomes everyone's existential journey for all of us. You know, None of us chose all this, but yet we have to play by those rules. We have to play, or we have to discover or learn how to grow, evolve from it, and becomes us. And I think many ways that really is the cathartic journey of Pachpan in this film, 55, which has been his like, in his case, nobody gave him anything, including a name. The only one who gave him was a number, and that he has to now figure out how to be more than a number in a city of 20 million people. And that really what is, for me, the beating heart of the film.
I think what's interesting about Pachman is he can actually, he could see himself as indirectly responsible for another person's death as well as its effect on a family. And people, no matter what strata you're from, would say, well, it's just survival of the fittest. It's not my problem. Can you just talk about infusing that theme? And then I don't want to give too much away, but there's a character who says that anyone can be a hero on a given day. It's just the daily grind of life that beats you down. And that I thought was very resonant. So can you just talk about those two elements I think that are sort of fighting through your story, which I found very touching as well.
Greg, that's my favorite line of the script. When I wrote it, for me, that really is like the culmination of the entire film. And it's like I wrote it 20 different ways, that line, but that's the line I ended up with because for me, that really is like that's really our, like what Andy Warhol said, in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. I think in our present time, everyone is going to be famous for 15 seconds. That's the attention span we have. And I think people choose to be heroes for those 15 minutes. But my always feeling was I grew up around people, my parents and my friend, who just found a way to grind every day without having that 15 minutes or without ever pining for those 15 seconds moment of glory. And that really was for me the quintessential line that embodied the spirit of the film. And I'm so glad that you picked up on it. And thank you for picking up on it. In terms, going back to the point that you and I were talking about earlier, you're absolutely right. Mumbai, of all the cities, is perhaps the most Darwinian city I've ever seen. It truly is. In fact, my opening line of my script is that it's a living, breathing Hieronymus Bosch painting. And I didn't just want to say that, I wanted to capture it in my camera. It's overwhelming. And, you know, we also talked about how the times we live on are so demanding right now on each and every one of us. And especially children. I think the time where I grew up as a young kid or you grew up as a young kid is long gone. That kind of where we were not literally held accountable for every second of our life. That pressure is so enormous on children. So how do kids grow up in times or in cities that's just literally looking to eat them alive? And my answer to that was this is not just a Mumbai story, it's a global story. And what I found truly interesting while writing this is that here's a kid who's trying to steal back his humanity. And that's all he's trying to do in this one. And that's really, for me, what a very redemptive way of finding my own way of coming to terms with such an overwhelming city. Like, just to give you an idea, just to put some sort of a perspective, imagine the population of the state of New York, 20 million people condensed into the strip of Manhattan. That's Mumbai. And that's literally how demanding that city is. So it really is very Darwinian that way. And in many senses, very Dickensian, which is exactly what the film is, a modern day Hollywood twist set in the streets of Mumbai. And that's really how I describe 55.
You and I are both currently, as of this recording, talking to each other, I guess, from California. And
Yeah.
when you traveled back to Mumbai to shoot your film, did you have time to reminisce about your own days in Mumbai, your own experiences, or was this is a new chapter in your life, you need to shoot from day one and you just take that out of your consciousness, or maybe that part of your reflections fed itself into the overall production and enhanced it? I don't know. So,
No, it's a great question. In fact, I think to give you another, and I speak always in these examples, so please bear with me. I think like this is, I think if it's an anecdote or a true story, I don't know. But once somebody asked Picasso, why do you charge so much money for a line drawing of a bull? Like it's just a line drawing with a pencil, it cost you nothing. He says, well, it costed me 40 years of my life experience to get to this point to just draw a pencil. So to your question, do you get affected by it at that moment? Do you react to it and not react to it? I don't think you're in control of that. I think it's seeped into your life. It's in your subconscious. It just, it really stays there either as a story or an image or an experience or a smell. These are all sensory elements in my experience that I feel like everything has some sort of I think art is basically how you decorate space. To me, movies is how you decorate time. Every time you watch a movie, you have some sort of a recollection of a time of your life. And I think those are also associated with the place you saw it, with the people you saw it, what moment you shared. And it's that collective experience, in my opinion, that really sits at your head in back in your subconscious. It's really very Freudian that way. And I think to your question, Mumbai has always been a part of my life, psychologically, or so it's something that when I wrote it, I made sure that it's as much of a protagonist in the film as Pachpan is. And so that people can understand that how much you're a part of the environment you choose to be in, or you don't have a choice to be in Pachpan's case. And yet how much it plays such a vital, pivotal role in shaping your character.
I have a very just curious businessy question after watching this
Yes.
movie. I loved it so much. And so
Thank you so much.
me as a cinephile, I'm saying this director, I hope he is getting some kind of huge deal and will make all these awesome films, and I want him to do this and I want him to do that. That's just me as an audience member, but I'm asking you personally, how has this film changed your life? And I'm hoping for one thing, but the most important thing is what you are hoping for and dreaming about. So wondering what's going on with you.
First of all, as like from your mouth to God's ears, thank you for wishing such a great thing. And I I wrote 55 as a very redemptive process because, and I'm being very honest and while listening, admitting to a certain things that I made a movie called Eden first, and it was sorry, I'm going to curse here. It was a complete piece of shit. And it just kind of was really disappointing for me because I wasn't able to tell the film I was wanted to make. And I didn't write it, I was instrumental in producing it. And I let the boxes to be checked as opposed to tell the story I wanted to tell. And that was a really learning process for me. For me, that was like, I started beginning to doubt myself. I said, is it all philosophies or do I actually know how to tell a good story as a notoristic point of view? And that was a real, so I said, the only way I'm going to find out is by really putting money where my mouth is. Like, I have to kind of put myself to that test. So 55 became that journey. And I had to make it for redemption for myself as a filmmaker. I really did. And I'm being completely transparent and honest with you because I didn't make it for anyone else. I made it for myself. Like, am I lying to myself? Or am I truly, can I truly make good film? And can I, like, for me, like my influences primarily came out of a lot of photographers. I've been one of the greatest photographers I've always admired is, Henri Cartier-Bresson. And very early on, I understood and really deeply admired the idea of decisive moment, his philosophy of a decisive moment. And then, of course, as I started kind of getting exposed to other stuff, the director besides Ingmar Bergman and a lot of Indian directors that I grew up watching, the director who had an equally profound effect on me was the French director Robert Bresson. So I'm literally stuck between two Bressons. So my life is a sandwich between the two Bresson breads. So that's how I put it. But it really was. And Bresson's film Pickpocket, this is my homage to Bresson's film Pickpocket, is I found his transcendent style of filmmaking, which Paul Schrader called it, and as a transcendent style of filmmaking, is that austere style of filmmaking purely working and just focusing on the idea of a character's redemptive arc. Because Robert Bresson always works with this assumption that all human beings are flawed. Everyone is flawed. The question is, can we find redemption? And that's what really his films are so transformative. And they have this kind of almost like a spiritual awakening in them. That's an underlying thing. And that's what really filmmaking is, right? Like, as I think Robert Evans said this really well, he said every film has three stories in it: the one you're telling, the one the audience are listening to, and then the unsaid story that stays with them forever. And it's really where the unsaid story is what the real art of filmmaking is. It's multiple ways of telling, but the unsaid story that always lives in your subconscious. And I think to a large extent, Bresson mastered that. And Bresson also had a very bunch of strict rules as to how he used to use camera movement. For him, the greatest philosophy was a camera move cannot be unmotivated. So what's motivating it? Is it purely a move like a commercial, like flash cuts, or is it really driven by the story, driven by the characters? So that all goes back into this primary way of understanding that it all comes back to your character's redemptive, or for that matter, whatever the journey is. And that becomes your destiny, which really is the Greek philosopher Heraclitus who said that your character is your destiny. And I think it's very much like the Jungian philosophy of ego and persona and stuff. So I think that really is that kind of a definition to where what should I say, the reason why I made this film.
So a couple questions before I let you go is how important, and I apologize for the mispronunciation, how important was it to have Emraan Hashmi as part of your ensemble? And then my second part of that is what is Rizwan doing now? Because he's amazing in the movie as well. So
Rizwan is fantastic. In fact, I'll give you a bunch of anecdotes about Rizwan. And Rizwan, when he first came, he was so raw and fresh that he couldn't really give me what anyone was looking for. Even the casting director was, no, I don't think you should go with him. But nothing struck out to me more in Rizwan than his eyes. I just looked at his eyes and I'm like, my God, there's enormous amount of depth in those eyes. And it's just so I actually went back and rejiggered the film for him because what he brought to the character was something beyond that was on the page. And I felt like that needed to be respected because he was the living, breathing embodiment of 55. And the thing that immediately struck to me was his quiet strength. And I had to pivot as a filmmaker to understand that. And I'll give you another example of that just on a set. And this is what I meant by was saying when I was earlier referring to Sir Ridley Scott, and he's a knighted sir. It's funny because I make fun of it all the time. But the presence on a set to recognize that something altering is happening in that scene and to react to it. So the example that I was going to give you in Rizwan's context is there's a particular scene when the police come to tell Uma that her father died. And, 55 in his typical way is being voyeuristic and watching it from a distance, which is what he's always done. But in this particular scene, he crosses the river, the proverbial river or the metaphorical river, and goes to the other side. And he really needs to kind of confront, so to speak, the result of his actions. So I had him come down, but the scene as it was written it was between police inspector and Uma, and he's standing in the background. I just felt like that would be incredibly wrong not to observe Rizwan's face or 55's face. So I pivoted and I just on that one moment made it into literally a 40-foot long dolly shot. So it was just, yeah, I created pandemonium on the set because they weren't prepared for a 40-foot dolly, but they pulled it out. More power to the grips, and so they pulled it out, and it just becomes a long shot where we have all this information being told by the police inspector to Uma, her reaction, but it all becomes like this camera really goes to his face and it was like from the end of the corridor to this end of the corridor, and that's throughout that scene, and by the end of it, now that's his quintessential moment of facing everything that his life meant so far and where he's going to go from. So that was incredible. It was a very pivotal moment for me. So that, once again, was extremely motivated by what he was bringing to the set. One more small little story, and then I'll shift to Emraan Hashmi. There's a last shot where he finally goes to see, his farewell to the love of his life, or as to watch and he's watching from the rooftop. We ran into some technical issues because there was supposed to be backlights and those lights went off. So we had to get those lights back up, and it took us hours to get them back up. And I was afraid that he would lose his concentration of the shot in those 3-4 hours, where it was a very long wait by the light, and we couldn't shoot that without those lights. But he sat in a corner, he didn't talk to anyone. And the film itself had a lot of breaks, and we had to take a break because we couldn't shoot so we had to come back. So I felt that this was something that's going to affect him. But on the contrary, he went and sat back in the corner there. He didn't say anything to anyone. And when we started shooting, he just came in, and the way he stared across, there was a thin glisten of tear in his eyes. I didn't ask him to do that. I didn't tell him anything. I didn't say anything to him. He just came, he stood, and all I was that I just shot it. And it was almost like a very fatherly moment, like, all right, my son has grown up. And that's really how I felt about it. It's like my work is complete. He knows how to react, understand what that moment is, and I don't have to tell him. And he was very young at that time. I think he was like 15 when we shot this film. I think he's started and he's kind of doing some other films. And I do plan to do some sort of, I'm trying to see if he can be my Antoine Donnell and see if he can do some sort of a progressive.
Oh, please. I hope I'm gonna hold you to that. Yeah, I might have to. Yeah, yeah, I will definitely hold you.
And coming to Emraan Hashmi, sorry, Imran obviously is a very big name in Bollywood. And part of the reason why I kind of had to pivot to him to also is because I was thinking indie actors, more theater-based actors, was because it helped with the financing. It helped with all those sort of things, at least, But when I started talking to Imran, I found this insatiable need to want to do something that was very unlike anything he'd done. I'm not sure how much of a Bollywood you follow, but everybody's perennially young there, perennially cool, and perennially like Superman. They can lift things. So it's a kind of an abstract, fantastical world, which is how Bollywood world is, and it's got its own genre, it's got its own audience, and it does extremely well. Some of the stories are actually really entertaining, but that isn't this film. So for him to kind of really cross over and really embrace it, for me was really refreshing to see, to the point where he was willing to change his hairstyle, grow the beard to the point where I wanted it to, because I didn't want to use any, fake makers thing stuff. And he was okay with embracing his gray in the hair, which is like almost like a death kiss in Bollywood. It's like, oh my God, he's become old now. Everyone wants to be Benjamin Button there. So it's like, so it's not that it's any different here to in the commercial world, but what I'm saying is it's very like almost expected there. So he took that risk. And even small things like how we choreographed and rehearsed and blocked the shots. He was always on set, and which is he kept sitting there. And I was like, he would talk and he said he wanted to be so, he didn't ever leave and go back to his trailer or Vanity Man. He just was always on the set. And another small thing that, and it's really interesting to show his dedication, was like the limp. My point to him was that if the audience notice your limp, then it's fake. If they don't notice it, then that means we got it right. So he said, how do we do it? I said, you have to limp constantly, and even not when I say raw action, you start limping, it's going to be fake. So, and I told him about this anecdote that at least I read somewhere, that in For The Usual Suspects, Kevin Spacey's, limp was really, the way he figured it out was he put a stone in his shoe so that he made it so uncomfortable while walking, and he would walk all day in it. He would never take it off. And I told that to Imran, and he said, I want to try it. And he did. And he started, and he carried the stone in his pocket throughout, and he would always put it in his shoe and start walking around. And that's really how he embraced it. So, which kind of was, for me, was like, I really appreciated what he brought to the table for that.
Shyam, thanks again so much for your time. And my final question is just a quick, just anecdote. You mentioned Fanny and Alexander as one of the reasons why you wanted to become a filmmaker. I remember in 1982, Siskel and Ebert, they reviewed it. They said how awesome it was. And I promised, I said, I'd definitely watch it. I remember even holding the VHS double tape of Fanny and Alexander at my local video store, waiting to rent it, but I think I rented something else. 43 years later, I still haven't seen it. In layman's terms, what am I missing from this Bergman classic from your POV?
By the way, there's now Blu-ray now. Criterion has a
Oh,
Blu-ray, so you don't even, yeah.
okay.
So it's, yeah, I think I have it somewhere up here. So probably. It's one of the most, I think we are all products of our childhood, and we carry those memories immensely throughout our life. And that was the one thing that both Bergman and Tarkovsky had very much in a lot of their cinema, was how their childhood shaped them as adults. And to me, that was what one of the most transformative things of Fanny and Alexander was, the idea of innocence being shattered by reality and coming to terms with the mistakes and the decisions adults make and how that affects your life. And I guess in many ways, it goes back to the very first thing that I was telling you, the idea that you're within seconds that you're born, everything is decided for you. And that, I think, for me, from a personal point of view, and it's very subjective, it really is incredibly subjective. That's what appealed to me in Bergman's film. But it wasn't just the essence of the beating heart of the film, but it was how he visually shot it. It almost felt like wonderlight from the eyes of a child. And it's like there was almost like this, the world is such a beautiful place to live in, and there's this magnificent like vastness to it. And I think that's what was, the abstractness of it was what really attracted me, and the innocence, and that always carried for me. And the idea of growing up and coming to terms of how decisions that adults make was what struck to me as a filmmaker very much.
Sam, thank you so much for your time. Really love 55 and looking forward to our next conversation for your next film.
I would love that too. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I appreciate you coming. I know we had issues yesterday, so thank you for being so patient.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. For more movie and television reviews and interviews, please subscribe to my Deepest Dream channel. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And as always, thanks so much for your support. Take care. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. For more movie and television reviews